You lose the history points in here. And it came home to me what my dad said a long time ago. You know, he didn't like fiction, and he hated my reading fiction, but my mother and I both loved fiction. And he said to me, you don't need to read fiction. There is so much fiction in history that there's enough for you to read. So anyway, that was kind of how that happened. My mother, on the other hand, was more quiet in her work, but she helped with another group of women to establish the first scholarship for African American students in the high school in Albion. And as a matter of fact, the first year that they came together was the year I graduated from high school, and they voted to give me the scholarship. And my mother took me aside and she said, now, you have enough scholarships. You can't accept it because so-and-so needs it. And therefore, that's where it should go. So I declined the scholarship. So I mean, they sort of pointed me in the right direction, and I went with happy feet and happy mind and spiritual underpinnings. That's a long answer to a short question.
So history is history without answers. Yes. Next question.
Yes. So, do you have any suggestions to the revival of the recently closed Albion public school system?
Do I have any suggestions?
Can I make a correction? Because the Albion public school system is not closed.
Oh, okay. It's the high school. Yeah.
That's why you're here, is to make these corrections. Go ahead.
Yes.
Well, I can only respond to what my understanding is. You know, everybody sees things in a different way depending on both their background and their understandings. Since I've been here this time, someone shared with me the fact that in trying to find a partnership, they found that Marshall was the only school within a certain radius of Albion that actually met state standards. And so part of the reason for closing it, in addition to the importance of making sure that our students in Albion have the best education they can get, was the fact that as they looked around them, not only is Albion in trouble in terms of its educational systems at the high school level, but also many of the other cities around have a similar problem, and Marshall was the one place, I guess, that did not have that problem. So I don't know if that's true, but that's what I heard. And so from that perspective, I have to say that finding the place for your children to succeed is perhaps one of the most important things a community can do for its children. And so if that works, wonderful. Yes.
What's it like coming back to Albion? Does it feel like home?
It feels like home. It's a really interesting journey from where I've been back to Albion. I believe I've been back many times, and over the years as I've come back, sometimes when I've come back that I've been a little disappointed and a little frustrated at some of the things I saw happening. The streetscape and the downtown buildings and merchandise places being closed, because they were part of the memory of my growing up years. As a matter of fact, when I won the debate contest, speech contest in the Detroit Free Press, sponsored back in the years when I graduated from high school, all the stores in Albion, downtown Albion, allowed me to pick out one item for my college, needs in terms of clothing, et cetera, et cetera. And that was very exciting. So to see this whole thing closed down, I thought, geez, that means that other young people who win this kind of scholarship are not going to get an opportunity to do what I did. But so that was sad to me. I came back, I don't know when it was, but probably 20 years ago, to talk with the town of Albion about economic development, because one of my travels and things that I learned about, especially when I was involved in banking, was the whole issue of economic development and how you put together collaborations to make sure that happens in the community. And so I think it was the college again who invited me back to talk to some of the people in Albion who might have the means to begin to revitalize the town economically. I was happy to be here, but I did not get a sense that there were many people here who had that vision. There were some people, I think, who felt like, well, we're dead. Let's fold up the sidewalks and go someplace else. And I think Albion lost a lot of particularly young people and energetic people who have done it. But there are people like Weston and Harry Bonner and some others who said, we can't do that. We have to brighten the corner where we are. If we're going to be agents of change. We have to be it in Albion because this is where our roots are. And so that, to me, has been a really encouraging sign because I'm now seeing bubbling up the whole issue of economic development in Albion. I understand there's going to be a hotel built. And the other thing is that Albion has reached out beyond its borders in terms of your sister city program, and I think you were voted, I don't know whether it was this year or recently, one of the best sister city programs. So you give the children of this community and others an opportunity to be connected with the world, and that's wonderful. And those connections have been nurtured in a way that your sister cities feel like they're a part of you. And I understood that yesterday a check for $900 was received. I don't know if you got it yet, but because your sister city in France heard that Victory Park had some severe damage because of the recent storms. And so, as a member of a family would, they sent a check saying, here's our part to help you rebuild. So it's those kinds of things help me to understand that the roots are not dead. And sometimes the plants, I learned in botany a long time ago, I do remember, the one thing is that sometimes the green part of the plant, the part that's above the earth, only comes around 20 years, 10 years, 100 years. Albion is not going to take that long. You're going to come to life again above ground. And I can see it and feel it, and it's exciting, really exciting.
Along that line of thinking, what can small, large colleges like Albion and communities like Albion, how does that relationship work? How can a college be an effective part of its community?
Well, I think the first thing probably that has to be reinforced is that it's a partnership. It is not years ago I was engaged by the Education Department of the State of New York to evaluate and write the protocols for a program that we call Community Involved Literacy. And what they did was to say that the only applications that we will receive and accept and consider funding are applications that are partnerships. And sometimes when you have a place like a university or a school district and they have to partner with neighborhoods, the partnership idea gets lost because the people who are in the driver's seat and have the most education and sophistication feel like they have to run it. And one of the things I'm seeing here is there seems to be a true collaboration, and that you're engaging the people that you want to be engaged with. And it's a different mindset of being engaged with, doing a partnership than it is we want to help you. It's not that we want to help you, it's that we want to be engaged with you so that you can do what you need to do and what you believe you can do. It's kind of more of a working for the infinite possibilities that are here in this community and saying, we want to be a part of that. And so I think that's an important piece. I've been on a couple of boards, one university board, where part of the challenge that town has had in that university is the professors in the university feel like they know what to do. And if you'll just follow us and be what we want you to be, we'll be okay, we'll all be okay. I think the other thing is understanding that if the town is a failure, there's something about the university or the college that's also a failure. Because colleges are about emerging and identifying the kind of possibilities, the kind of role that the intelligence that is natural to this place gets a showcase and gets encouraged. And I think that's another piece that has to happen. And also, a college can bring resources because of its visibility in the academic world and to the world of foundations, can help to bring resources to the community in which it lives and grows and adds its strength and life. And if it doesn't do that, then eventually there will be at least the death of that part that's above the ground. And of course, nobody wants that. And so I think that's another thing.
Other questions?
Could you talk a little bit more about your work on a national level with community revitalization? I know you were involved with a couple of different national initiatives.
Yes, there are a couple of things that that come to mind there. It's funny, I don't know how I got into that, but I sort of followed the pathways that were in front of me. And of course, I made some choices. But when I became president of my local neighborhood organization, that seat meant that I had a seat in a group, a board called National Neighbors. And National Neighbors was a Ford Foundation project that was funded because of a group of men and women who met at Antioch College after the civil rights, after the death of Dr. Martin Luther King. And they were afraid that governments and other people who did not want there to be a successful civil rights movement, that they would win if they didn't do some things to plan how they were going to make sure that those things didn't happen to them. So it was an interesting, for me when I became president of that board, that part of my job was to travel around the country to these various members of the organization to help them think about how we can be successful in what we're trying to do in keeping integrated neighborhoods integrated. Because one of the things that happened, particularly back in the early 70s, is we had some ill-thought-through programs of the federal government which allowed there to be railroads and highways built through these communities that separated, that resegregated towns. And so, how do we stop that roller coaster that seems to be going in our community? And so, I learned as much as they did. Part of it was, my job was to help them think about it. My job was not to propose solutions, but to help them find their own solutions out of their own history and their background and their skills. And so that was a really wonderful training ground for me. And so when I became an elected official, and because of the plans that one of the politicians sort of decided on to keep me from accepting that job, they said, you know what, you have to give up your job in education in order to do this because it's conflict of interest, because we vote on the school district's budget. And they never had done that before, nor did they do it after, but they thought if they offered me the job, they would satisfy any critics who would say, well, Ruth Scott's the most qualified, and why didn't you choose her? Well, lo and behold, to their chagrin, which they did not tell me about until I stepped down from the council, until at least 13 years later, I took the job and went on to actually work in a bank, because the bank called me and said, we know you don't have a job and we'd like to offer you one. So I went to work in the bank, and when the National Community Reinvestment Act was passed, I then was made the Community Reinvestment Officer, because nobody else was really that interested. Nobody else in the bank was really that interested or invested in making sure that communities were revitalized. And since I have a lot of passion around this issue of empowerment, they said, well, you're going to be. And I said, okay. And then I learned as much as I could about that subject, and I began to do some work both with banks on the banking side to help them understand not only what the responsibilities were, but how they could meet the requirements of the act so that they wouldn't get penalized by the federal government. I mean, it was a wonderful opportunity to make them come to the table because they were going to lose money. They were going to lose the ability to offer new services, and they were going to lose the ability to merge with other banks and buy other banks. So that was a great act. And it's still on the books, by the way. It's still supposed to be being enforced, but nobody's paid a lot of attention to it for a number of years now. But that's kind of how I got into that, and as a result, I had a really wonderful experience. Somebody hired me to be a part of a team that worked with the city of San Diego to reorganize its government. And so, you know, I was able to use all those skills and ideas that I had prior to that time to make that happen.
Other questions? Yes, go ahead.
Okay, if other panel members would like to comment on this as well. Recently, the movie Selma was released in theaters. Have you seen it, and if so, what did you think of it?
I didn't see it yet, but I've heard a lot of comments about it, and before I see it, I think I've begun to have some sense of the various challenges that people find in it. Well, first, but you have to remember it's a movie, you know. So I mean, of course, there was a lot. It's not a documentary, and so there are going to be a lot of things in it which are there because they enhance and make the story more meaningful in terms of the audience that's going to see it. So, you know, the criticisms that are being leveled at the director and the writer probably are not fair. And I don't remember a movie that got so much criticism before it came out as Selma has gotten. And conclusions that have been drawn about what it's about and what it's like without seeing it. So I'm not going to address that part because I haven't seen it yet, but I suspect that it is an excellent movie because it's well documented, and the people who put it together are very skilled. So I'd be surprised if it was not a good movie. Yes?
I can comment.
Okay.
I don't want to interrupt you.
Okay. So anyway, that would be my response. I think it's important as a conversation starter. You know, we go through these periods in our country when something really riveting happens, and we talk about it for a long time, but we do not strategize about how to change what we have seen and what we've heard and the results of what's happened. So it seems to me that Selma is perhaps another opportunity, another catalyst to make that kind of thing happen again. And in this time, hopefully, we'll begin to engage people in looking for solutions. You know, because we just have a tendency, I don't know if it's an American trait, it may be, you know, get all excited about something in the moment. And just, you know, take Ferguson, take Katrina, you know, any number of things that have happened over the years that for the minute, everybody's focused on, wow, you know, this is really a terrible thing, or this is really a wonderful thing, and we all ought to be a part of it. And then the interest wanes, and the next thing, we go on to the next exciting thing, or the next tragedy. I think our problem is we do not build intergenerational commitment to change. And until we do that, we will not have the kind of house of brotherhood or beloved community that King talked about.
I have seen it. It'll make you cry. So it's very powerful emotionally. The main criticism has been the characterization of President Johnson. I'll leave that aside now and mention just a couple of ways it connects to the present. Well, one, we're badly in need of reinvigoration of our history. We're kind of a history-depleted society in terms of the way it's taught or not taught. But two ways it connects. The Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, and this shows what went into the Voting Rights Act, and this whole voter suppression movement of current times is shameful in my judgment, and so I have to get some perspective for that. The other thing, I would tie into Ferguson and Tamir Rice and those other cases. A part of the Selma story that's less well known is that this organization by SNCC in the area to get voting rights, and a march wasn't the big plan. Register people. And Jimmy Lee Jackson was killed in a way that is kind of a precursor of the police shootings of black people today. There are a lot of different instances, but that's very vivid there. I think it's pretty clear. He was executed by the police. He was trying to protect his grandfather and mother, police were brutalizing in a voting rights campaign. And the initial call for a march from Selma to Montgomery was by James Bevel. Let's carry the body of Jimmy Lee Jackson from Selma to George Wallace's Capitol steps. And calmer voices said, well, let's not do that, but let's do the march. And so the famous marches, including Bloody Sunday, and then the one that finally worked. So it does resonate on that front too, I think, as well. So you should see it, and hopefully we'll get it at the bone.
How many people seen the movie? So, okay. Yeah, that's interesting. About the characterization of it. It's a movie. It's a whole entire purpose of a documentary. It was the one that came, that Tom Brokaw did. I think people would see that if they're really interested in knowing the history, because it did right after King's death and all of that. And so it's a whole entire different purpose of it. The other challenge, let me ask Dr. Scott. A large part of your career has been in education, and I think one question about how we see education today and everything. The challenges that presented to education today, I was looking at one of the things you did before where it says, interlopers should not be really trying to decide everything, educational reform and all of that. That was said then. Do you still feel that way, or would you say something different?
That's a good question. Actually, many times, whatever I say when somebody asks me something, it has a background to it, and it's,
right.
And so I respond in terms of the now experience. I still think that educators ought to be doing education. I mean, I don't think, in many, let me back up a minute, in many things that I've seen in my own district, and in some districts across the country, there's been a kind of incursion into the classroom by people who don't know what they're talking about, don't know anything about how children learn, don't know how change happens in terms of the mind and the spirit of the young people who are being engaged. And we went through this whole process after a while. When something happens in this country, we do two things. We throw money at it, and we also say, you know what, they're not doing a good job, so I think I ought to go in and do it, even though I don't know anything about what I'm talking about. And so we have these programs, and I'm sure we've gotten some good educators, perhaps, out of the Teach America program and some of the other programs where they've truncated the educational experience of the person going into teaching. And they said, we can take an engineer, we can take somebody, particularly business was one of those groups where we're going to take somebody with a business experience and put them in the classroom, and they can do the same kind of teaching that a person who's been grounded in educational theory and practice can do. And that's simply not true in my view. And so I think, you know, it's sort of like the issue that I had when our community decided in order to change the school district, they should bring in Jesse Jackson. Well, you know, Jackson has some positive traits, He had some passion around issues of people being able to dig down within themselves, to revitalize their spirits, and to believe that they could do. He had no education. There were black educators, because they wanted to bring in somebody who was black. There were black educators who'd been studying these problems and been successful in colleges and universities in putting together institutes that changed the educational systems where they were. And yet they didn't bring in one of those people, and I was annoyed. And that was particularly at that time, so that was part of why that statement came forth at that time. But I still think we have a tendency to say anybody can do it, and that's not true. In fact, one of the things I said, and I had taught a graduate class in Foundations of Education, and at one time, and people didn't like it, but I said, you know, one of the best things that could happen in this class is for some of you to decide you don't want to go into education. You know, and you need to think about what is your philosophy of education. Why are you here? Why do you want to teach? Why is it important for you to finish this course that you're on to get your master's degree in education? We need to do more thinking about that, because there's some people in education who shouldn't be there. You know, because they're there for the wrong reasons. An example of this business of interlopers, I'm funny, I didn't realize I'd use that word, was that I had an experience with my own granddaughter where she was taking a chemistry class, and her grades went down precipitously, and I went in to talk to the teacher to find out what the problem was. And as always, I have learned over the years that my mother used to say this too, that you get more, oh dear, my phone's going off, and I didn't realize it was going off. But anyway, and I apologize to you. We decided, I went up, and my mother used to say to me, you get more sugar, you overuse with sugar than you, honey than you do with vinegar. So I kind of swallowed hard and tried to put on my best emotional state so I could go talk to this teacher. So when I sat down to talk with the teacher, I said to him, first thing, I saw these books on the windowsill, and I said, oh, are these the new books, you know, chemistry books? And he said, yes. And I said, when do you give them out to the students? And he said, well, I'm responsible for these books, and if I give them to the students, they'll just tear them up. I said, well, can my granddaughter have one? I finally decided that, you know, I couldn't save all the children, I needed to save this kid. So I said, can my granddaughter have one? And he said, well, if you'll sign for it. Now, it was purchased. The books were purchased because we didn't have enough books in our system. So then I thought I'd take another tack, and I said, yeah, how did you, where did you come from to get into education? And he said, well, I was a computer salesman, and I wasn't very good at selling computers. And so my friend said to me, if you want a good job with high pay and good retirements, go into teaching. And it was at that time when we had the program in this country, we said we could take somebody, we could train them in, I don't know, what's a month or something, and send them into a classroom. And they'll go into the inner city classrooms where some of the most difficult problems exist in terms of learning and teaching. We'll pay them extra. You know? Duh. Okay, that's how he got here. The real question I wanted to ask him was, how come you gave some of the kids a list of the elements without the periodic chart? And he said, I don't know what he said to that, but by then I was so mad. I just said, well, we better check her out of this class. Because obviously he didn't intend to teach, he didn't know anything about teaching, you know. Now, I should not have drawn maybe that conclusion from that one incident, but there were others. There have been other incidents also. that have troubled me. Yes, ma'am, this is the educator. This is the educator.
May I make an observation? We have several people who indicated they were related with college. And many of the questions that Ruth has answered, she has talked about doing research and looking into the background and getting a complete story. It came up about the inadequacy, for want of a better term, of what was happening generally during the time in the Albion education system. She's a product of the system, and one of the things that she learned, and I'll bring this up as a debater, was to do research. Now that came out of the Albion, her experience in the Albion public schools. And you listen to the terms that she's using about doing studies, looking here, looking there, before making an opinion. And this is that lifelong learning thing, and putting to use some of the experiences that came about educationally.
So will that be one of the civic wrongs, going back to tomorrow night when you are going to talk about development of America, community, civil rights, civil wrongs, and the dream? Are we still talking about MLK's dream? If so, what form of that? And do you believe that we will ever get to the mountaintop?
You have a propensity for asking very difficult and complicated questions. I want you to know that.
That's my DNA.
Is your MO? Well, I think, yes, I do think we will get to it. One of the statements that Martin makes is that he believed that the long arc of history bends towards justice.
Okay.
It sometimes takes a lot of time, although we live in we have a finite experience in life because our lifespan is so short in terms of the history of what happens to people and nations and families and cities. So I think we sometimes get impatient to see things happen. If we got as impatient to help make things happen, maybe there wouldn't be this disconnect between the dream and the reality.
Okay.
And in Martin's book, Community or Chaos, he talks about the importance of building the beloved community. The dream is not dead, but you have to remember what dreams are. Dreams are patterns of belief, pulling together patterns of belief, what you might like to see, what you might like to have happen. And so his dream was about what he wanted to have happen. It was that reaching and searching for something that's above the head. And but he believed, and I believe, that it can be done. The question is, who's responsible? And how do we come together as a collective family in communities to build a beloved community?
You think education plays what role is education?
Plays a major role because it serves as both a foundation and a building block, particularly for young people. And you know, the other thing about education, which I love, is that, and I think Wes Dick would agree with me, is that in some ways, if you are an effective educator, you learn as much as your students do.
Okay.
There's this kind of excitement, energy that flows from you to them and from them to you. And that's how you really are able to lift them up and to help them find the infinite possibilities in themselves. I know my husband agrees with this because we've talked about it a lot. But I think it is a very, very important key. Now the challenge is, how do we make sure that we're including in the curriculum and in the practice enough of the history, enough of the understandings about how teams work and how groups work, the whole group dynamic thing, how you capitalize on what you know and what you're able to do, how you build skills. I mean, all of those things are things that have to be a part of how we teach and how we interact with students. And you know, one of my favorite stories about interacting with students, and I don't really know what the result was, I kind of hope it was good, but I don't know. But I had a young man, for those of you who've read the book, you may remember this example. who said to me that he wanted me to understand that he was going to become a Nazi. And he loved Hitler. He thought, Hitler was wonderful. He made a tremendous contribution to the world. And he needed to understand that, because any assignment that I gave him that did not allow him to do something on Hitler, he wasn't going to do. So I said, well, let me just tell you this. I'm a teacher, and I will be grading you not only on how well you speak and how well you do research, but on whether you meet the assignment. And if the assignment is not about Hitler, we're not going to, I'm not going to give you the grade that you might want to have. So he said, well, don't you think I'm a good speaker? And I said, well, it depends on how you define good. Because he would give these rip-roaring speeches, and the kids would clap and scream and, all that kind of stuff. I said, but if that's not the assignment, then no, you haven't fulfilled the assignment. And that's all I'm concerned about, is you're fulfilling the assignment, because that's how you grow and that's how you learn. So after a number of conversations with this young man, he said to me, you know what, you must be a Christian. And Hitler thought that Christians did not deserve anything, that they were weak, that they didn't know what they were talking about or how they were living, and so they should be part of that part of humanity where they didn't get paid and they didn't, have any important roles. Well, I dug back in the philosophy class I had at Albion College, and I remembered that, and we did some reading about Hitler and Hegel. Hegel was the philosopher out of which Hitler formulated some of his ideas. And I said, but that may be true, what people think. They don't know, but that's what they think. But Hegel thought that Christ was a Superman. And then the theory of Superman versus other people is that the super people should be paid well, should be revered, should be held up as examples. And he said, where did you find that? I said, go look for it. And he did, and I never had another day's problem out of it. He began to do the assignments. So something happened, So that one of the things I love about teaching is that searching for connections, that if you are really engaged in your work, you will do, because you have a kid in front of you, and you have some of them are reluctant learners, some of them have blocks in their background and memory or their everyday experience. It makes them feel like, why is this important? But if you really love teaching and you love kids, and you believe that there's a link you can make it find. Now I did realize after I taught for a few years that the link might not happen until later. That connection, that energy that flows between the learner and the teacher is something that has to evolve over time. Because one time a young man had read that I was president of the Rochester City Council, and he called me up and said, and I didn't know who he was at the time. He was an FBI agent, and he wanted to know if he could have a discussion with me. And I'm thinking, now, what have I done? What have my friends done? What is he investigating? So he said, when I got to lunch, he said, do you remember me? And I said, no. I said, you look familiar, but I don't really remember you. And he said, I was in your 7th grade English class. And the more he talked, the more I could envision where he sat. Okay, did not remember him, but I remember where he sat. Because he always sat behind somebody, and was always hiding. It was kind of not wanting too much eye contact. And he said, well, I just wanted you to know, you told my mother that I was a really smart person, but I didn't know if I wanted anybody to know it yet. And I wanted to show you what I've become. And so I thought, I guess I did a good job there.
So that's a story. Let's turn back to Sarah. Let's see if, Sarah, do you have other key questions that you want to ask for our students from the PLEAD, or our students sitting in the back, or anything that you would like to ask?
If I could ask a question.
I'll sit back.
You looking at your career, and even as you're serving as council president in Rochester, New York, what would you say to the young girls of today, and especially the young girls of color, in terms of laying the foundation in order to be successful? And even to someone such as myself and our superintendent, who are now in leadership roles as females and as females of color, in order to also build those collaborations so that we too can be successful.
You people don't ask simple questions. That's my first answer. But, and not to, I'm not belittling it, but what you've asked, but what I want to say to you, I have found has really been important in my life, is not to allow anybody to put you in a box. And to, my great-grandmother used to say, there's no more than one way to skin a cat. I didn't know what that meant for a long time. But what she was saying to me is that if one door is not open, go to another one. So that there's this kind of constant commitment to yourself, to improve yourself, to improve your knowledge, and to improve your people skills. Because my mother said to me before I left home, you know, one thing about you is that you sometimes can be a little sharp in your the way you treat people and the way you respond to them. And I just want you to be a little bit more sensitive to how your words affect people. And I thought about that for a while. I never thought about that before. But it's that kind of, you know, finding a way to get your point across to people without worrying about, number one, what the response will be, and finding ways to connect with people so that you listen to them and you incorporate what they want in what you know you want, so that it begins to be a collaboration rather than a, I want to lead this, or I want you to know how important or how smart I am. It's kind of like, you know, us. It's a we instead of, you know, you and I. So I don't know if that answers.
What happens though when people put, you got American women, as far as I know, first African-American superintendent of our female superintendent district, first African-American city manager, female of our city, and so on and so forth. So what happens when people, especially when there's civil rights background and all of that, so what happens when people say, how does it feel to be the first so-and-so, and then yet you are going to be speaking to, like, tomorrow night, a very diverse group of folks. And it's kind of like our president. Is he the black president, or is he the future president? How do you feel when people put you in that box and want you to respond?
I try not to feel any way about it. You know, it's sort of like when the reporters asked me, when I first became a city council member, well, they said, you know, well, what do you want to be called? Do you want to be called Negro? Do you want to be called African American? Do you want to be called Afro American? And you know what I said to them? I said, you know what? I don't care what you call me, as long as you say it with respect, and as long as you don't call me late for dinner.
Okay.
So I mean, there are certain things that you have to figure out. What am I going to get excited about, and what am I not going to get excited about?
Right.
And there is a wonderful book, and I should have looked up the authors, but I did not. And it's called The Presumed Incompetence. And it is a book that a white professor and a black professor, well, both of them women, wrote about the fact that you have to understand as you go into certain roles that are new, not only to you, but to the people around you, that there's a certain amount of presumed incompetence.
Okay.
And then I go back to what my father said is, learn as much as you can, because what you get inside of you, nobody can take away.
Right.
No matter what they say, no matter what they do.
See, just follow my lead.
That's not good. I can tell you that from experience.
Okay, now we really need to wind up. My voice is beginning to get
Yeah, we have
scratchy.
about 5 more minutes for now that Sarah be our last.
Just, if you could talk a bit about your memoir and what prompted you to write that, and maybe a key
Great
thought
question.
that you're trying to get across in your memoir.
Thank you. Well, the memoir is called The Circles God Draws. And a few years back, the University of Rochester Rush Reeves Library local history department said they would like for me to give my papers to them. Well, in the first place, I didn't know why they wanted my papers, and it never occurred to me that there was anything in my papers worth having. But, so we talked about it for a while, and finally I decided, yes, I would be willing to donate the papers to them. However, I would screen them first. They wanted me to just give them to them, and they would go through them and give me back what they didn't think was important. And I thought, well, that's too much control to give somebody else. So anyway, they asked me about that, and when they came to get the papers, the curator said to me, when are you going to write your book? And I said, oh, someday soon. And he said, I really think you ought to write it now. And then I was going to tell that one. And then before that time, we were sitting together with Alex Haley, the author of Roots, one of the dinners that some people gave. And Bill and I happened to have the honor of being able to sit next to him. And he was talking about the importance of telling our stories. And so he said he wanted each of us to promise that we were going to tell our stories. And he said a lot of people think that what I've written is the history of the Negro race coming to the United States, and it's not true. It is the history of my family. And so you need to tell the history of your family so that people who come after you will know something about what's happened and what kinds of things they have to build on. And so when the curator said that, I began to think, maybe I should keep that promise I made very glibly. And what do you say to Alex Haley when it's, they tell you to do something? And again, you say yes. I mean, that's what you say. But what do you do? Which is part of my problem. So anyway, that happened. Then I had an accident. I was working on a young man's campaign for mayor. And I was out in front of my house, and I went to the car that he had come in to get some more materials out of the campaign materials out of the back of the car. And a garbage truck rolling down the street hit the car and knocked me across the driveway. I had a concussion, a brain injury, and it took me some time to really get my stuffings back together so that I really cared about doing the things I was doing. And so as I had almost recovered, I think, but the writing this story really helped me recover even more because I got outside of myself. I had not remembered what my father said about why he learned all those poems. He learned all the poems in the book called Beloved Poems of the American People. And it's a book that's probably 400 or 500 pages. And I asked him one time, why did you learn all those poems, or how did you learn all those poems? And he had tuberculosis. He had a lung removed. He had the first lung removal that the University of Michigan did. And that time they did not have the kind of painkillers we have now. And he said it helped take away the pain. And I kind of remembered that as I began to write the book, and it sort of flowed from that. At first, my husband and I were going to write the book together. By the way, he has 2 chapters in it. But the more we wrote, and we had an editor who worked with us, and she said, you know what, you have too many stories, you have too many stories. You write your book, and he should write his book. So now we're writing his book.
So the title of some of the God Draws was brought from where?
Well, it came out of my spiritual self, I guess, because I had a lot of I kept thinking, well, what am I going to call it? And I realized as I near the probably middle of the book, what we're made up of in terms of the way we live our lives is the experiences that we have from our families, our ancestors. There are other experiences that we have in the choices we make. But then there's those experiences that you really can't explain. Where do they come from? How do they happen? And so I believe it is a God-given, God-driven kind of opportunities that come to you. And so it's the circles God draws that are foundational, I think, to life.
Okay, final word, definition. She gave you the title of the book and why. The circle that God draws, which brought all of you here today. Thank you. And I see her along the way. She's trying to find a way to reserve her voice. I don't know how she's going to do that. And make this presentation tomorrow. I'll leave that to Wes to take care of. Without that, Thank you, and we look forward to seeing everybody. Reception tomorrow, are people invitation only, and what?
All these people are certainly welcome. It is by invitation, but if you haven't gotten the invitation, please come anyway.
Sounds great. Okay, thank you.